G'day. If you've been paying attention, you may have noticed that I've recently gone over 500 subscribers. And whilst that's tiny in the realm of YouTube, I think that's pretty dang awesome. So today, I wanted to make some kind of a milestone video. Now, I had hoped that people would ask me some questions, as I'd sort of hinted and posted in my latest video and community post. And no one really asked me anything, so that's kind of a showstopper for something like a Q&A. And all of my other sort of milestone ideas sort of came to nothing. So today we're going to do a special segment with the assistance of ChatGPT that I call Questions That Nobody Has Asked.
What inspired you to start exploring retro computers and programming?
If you mean inspired to use and program old computers, I basically started that when I was about 10 years old and never really stopped. So I wasn't so much inspired as just sort of found a natural interest in them. But in terms of making content, I was definitely heavily inspired by both LGR and Gemini from Ancient DOS games. Those two guys make excellent content. I didn't really want to copy what they were doing, so I actually wrote a blog for a number of years. And more recently, I decided to make that into a YouTube channel and talk about stuff that I'm interested in that's a little bit different to those guys and others on YouTube.
What's the first retro computer or programming language you ever worked with?
The first computer that I ever used probably would have been an Apple II when I was in primary school. I remember playing a game called Snack Attack, but that was well before we had a computer in the home. The first computer we had at home was a Twinhead 386SX, 20 MHz with a VGA card, although that was built into the motherboard. It was actually a pretty good PC to start with. It could play most of the games, but it also had a GW Basic interpreter on it, which is where I've learned to program at first. And that was so challenging and fun. I actually spent more time programming than I did playing games, and that was definitely a good thing.
What do you find most rewarding about working with vintage technology?
There's a few different rewarding aspects of retro computers and that kind of stuff for me. I find them challenging to learn about and to program, so I can spend hours sitting down with the computer manual and reading it and learning about something and then writing some code. I actually like the machines themselves, so tinkering with them, taking them apart, putting them back together, and tinkering with the settings. I know that a lot of people just do that just to play the games, but I actually like the messing about with them as well. Playing games probably actually comes secondary to all of that kind of stuff. I do enjoy the games, I do like them, but I don't actually play them as much as I probably do tinkering with the machines.
What's the most challenging retro computer repair or restoration project you've undertaken?
I actually don't do a lot of restoration projects, to be honest. The closest I would have come to that is trying to service and repair an old Canon 5¼ inch floppy drive that I have. And the only reason I wanted to repair it is because it's the one out of our old machine from the 90s. So it sort of had a bit of nostalgic value to me. Now, it had its power connector removed because I wanted to use that for a fan, so I had to sort out some issues. And I lubricated the drive and cleaned it and mucked around with it. And technically it works, but it's probably not in the best condition to use in a machine that you care about and on discs that you care about. So I think I'll probably have to have another go at that at some point. But in general, I don't actually do a lot of restoration.
How do you source and acquire your retro computer hardware?
So there's two main ways that I've acquired new old hardware, and most of that is basically buying stuff on eBay. The prices on eBay have gotten a bit crazy, so I don't really do that anymore, and partly because I don't have as much storage space available, I don't really have anywhere to put anything new that's old. So I haven't really bought anything for a while. I did for a while take donations from people I know, so my father-in-law living just down the street would sometimes bring me an old machine or something interesting, and I'll sometimes keep it, sometimes get rid of it. Some friends and colleagues from work at the various places I've been, And at one point I worked in an IT shop, a computer shop, and we'd have people bring in old computers there, and sometimes I'd ask the clients if I could have them.
What are the most rare or valuable pieces in your collection?
I don't honestly think I have much that's very valuable in my computer collection. Some of my Sun machines are probably worth a little bit, but they're not expensive by any means. I think the most rare item might be the Microbyte 386, just because there weren't that many of them made and they're from Australia. So it's kind of interesting. The Sun equipment is otherwise the most interesting thing I have.
What tips do you have for someone interested in starting their own collection of vintage computers?
Starting a new collection these days would be really kind of tough to do, given the prices on eBay being so high and people being aware of old technology being worth something to collectors. So it's really a hard ask to start a new collection from scratch nowadays, I think. And because of that, I think that you'll probably want to basically make everyone around you aware that you like old computers and you would like to have some of them. And you might be fortunate to get some donations from friends. Other than that, it's just got to depend on what you're willing to pay for them. You'll have to go through something like eBay most likely, or just make friends and trade with them. There's not a lot of other options.
What are some common mistakes beginners make when programming on vintage systems?
There are two very common mistakes that beginners make when programming in general. The first one is making spaghetti code. If you've ever coded in BASIC, you've heard this term. And spaghetti code basically means you've made a tangled mess that is difficult to understand, debug, and maintain. I think this is a problem even with some modern languages and beginners. Not so much in the same way that it was in GW Basic, for instance, where you'd have line numbers and code all over the place. But in modern stuff, you might have abstractions that you don't understand or remember how they fit together, or a library that you've used that you don't remember how to use. And these things spaghettify the code in your brain. The other thing that I can think of that is a mistake is actually related to graphics and old games and computer systems. So one of the mistakes I made when I was a teenager making games with graphics and that kind of thing was using graphic sizes that weren't a power of 2. So I was using 10 by 10 as a common graphics tile size, and I had no idea that that was a bad thing to do. Now, the reason it's a good idea to have your graphic size a power of 2 is it makes it much easier to divide or multiply to make a tile map. If you're using a power of 2, you can just use left and right shift, and that's very cheap compared to the multiply and divide instructions. So if you're running on an old PC, you probably definitely want to make sure that you use something that you can do cheaply.
How can someone learn to program in older languages like COBOL or Fortran today?
With learning to program for an old vintage machine, there's sort of a dichotomy of two problems you have. You've got to find yourself good learning material and also good tools. Now, there are some actually really good modern tools for programming for old machines, some of them integrating with emulators and all of that kind of stuff. But the best learning material is actually generally those made at the time the machines were current. So books from the 80s and 90s are usually a very good source. The trouble is, those books won't have the information in them about how to use the modern tools. So you might want to use the old tools for a while until you've learnt enough of the ropes, but it's not really ideal. Maybe find some modern stuff to tell you how to use the modern tools, and then use the older material to actually learn how to program for the machine.
What do you think the future holds for the preservation of vintage computers and software?
In terms of preservation of hardware, that is both becoming trickier and easier at the same time. So new projects that incorporate FPGAs are allowing new technology to fill in the gaps where the old stuff is falling apart. But the old stuff is going to keep falling apart, and so it's going to become more and more scarce over time. So hardware-wise, things are going to look different over time, and we're just going to end up with a Ship of Theseus style situation happening, where we end up replacing more and more of the original machines, until there's not really much left of them. Software-wise, we're in a much better boat, but the problem we have in the long term is that older software is going to be better preserved than newer software. So something that you're playing today probably has less of a chance of being preserved than something you played in the 80s, 90s or 2000s, which is kind of sad in many ways. It's fine for me because I like playing the old stuff, but it's not going to be great for people of the current generation when they want to play their current games in future.
How do you stay motivated and inspired to create content about such niche topics?
There's sort of really two questions here. How do I stay motivated, and how do I find inspiration to make something? Inspiration is not so hard because there's a lot of topics and there's a lot of areas that haven't been explored that I'm interested in that I'd like to make a video about. I've sort of got a mental list of all the things I'd like to do, and I've got a lot of hardware I haven't shown, and there's a lot of software I'd like to explore as well. Motivation, on the other hand, is a much more tricky beast. I experience a lot of burnout, so I think that's a big part of the reason I don't make that many videos over a period of time. So I'm mostly managed maybe once or twice every couple of months. And that's not great in terms of amount of output. But what drives me to keep making videos is actually interest in the hobby, and having videos to make keeps me doing stuff in the hobby as much as anything else. And making videos is kind of fun, so that's why I'm doing it. When I'm not burned out.
Do you have any upcoming projects or topics that you're particularly excited about?
Once I have a bunch of ideas in my head about what I want to do, I don't actually know what I'm going to do until I do it. So excited for upcoming plans, not so much. I have been involved in beta testing a DOS game recently that's already been released, but I will make a video about it sooner or later. That's kind of fun and interesting. Other than that, just making videos about my stuff will be interesting and fun enough.
Can you recommend some resources, books, websites, forums for viewers interested in retro computing and programming?
In terms of programming resources, there are a couple of books on archive.org that I found really useful in terms of finding graphics programming information. So I'll link those in the description below. In terms of software, I found an emulator recently called Marty PC. I'm pretty sure that a lot of people already know about it, but it's a cycle-accurate version of the IBM PC in emulator form. And it's been really handy for testing my platform game. If you want to write something for the IBM PC or old DOS machines in general, that is a good place to test your software on the slowest machine possible. If you don't want something quite as slow as an IBM PC, I find that 86box is a good resource in terms of emulators as well, or you could use PCM. Both of those are great emulators, and better than DOSBox. DOSBox, great for playing games, not so much great for developing them, because there are a lot of differences between it and real hardware. So you'll get something working in DOSBox, it won't work on real hardware. So definitely don't use it to develop seriously, at least your hardware interfaces, because your thing will crash when you get it on real hardware, trust me. That wraps it up for all the questions from nobody. If you're a somebody and you want to ask a question, please leave it in the comments section below. I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you next time.